can feel my body cold against the concrete, but I can't seem to get enough. My mind is fixed on what it wants.
So let's play a game of Spot the Difference. So now that we're adults, Spot the Difference needs to be a little bit more difficult. So in this video, it's going to be like a triple threat hybrid video. So I'm going to take you guys through the 5 most used gimbal shots, a game of spot the difference between what was shot on the Steadicam and what was shot on the gimbal, then some tips on using a Steadicam or a gimbal like the DJI Ronin SC. So if you're new to the channel, welcome. This channel is all about affordability and creativity in filmmaking. So if that's something that you're into, consider subscribing. Alright, let's not beat around the bush. There are so many different types of shots you can get with a Steadicam or a gimbal. So when I talk through these next five shots, because that would be 4, when I talk through these next 5 shots, don't think this is the end of the list. Don't think that that's all you can do with a gimbal. There's so much more, and I implore you to start working on so much more. Get unique, get whatever you can out of using a gimbal. So let's go through the 5 different types of shots and see if you can work out what was shot on the Steadicam, what was shot on the gimbal, and let's start with a rotating shot. So which one do you think was which? Maybe you know, maybe you're kind of like, I think I know, but I'm not really sure. So if you're really surprised by the outcome, let me know in the comments. Super interesting to hear what you think and if you can really see the difference as much as I can. So the first shot was shot on the Steadicam. Now this shot is much more difficult to do on the Steadicam because on a gimbal, like an intelligent gimbal, you can set up so that you can just follow around a subject. Whereas with a Steadicam, you're constantly holding this here and using your fingers to rotate as you move around a subject, which makes it, of course, much more difficult and leaves you much greater room for error. The gimbal is just, you know, a slight twist of the hand, and depending on your deadband settings, you can have a lot of room for error, which gives you a much smoother looking shot. Now, some tips for using the rotation shot. If you're rotating around a subject, you want to make sure that they're contrasted from the background. Essentially, that means that they're standing out from the background. The last thing you want is someone to have a similar color shirt or a similar look to whatever the background is, because they just won't stand out and it won't give a dramatic effect like you're looking for. So also, when you're shooting on a gimbal, you're more than likely using a wider angle lens, because that's what most people use. And for a gimbal, that helps with breaking up any kinks, any additional movements in the shot that you don't want. However, if you're doing a rotating shot and you're trying to get that background to move around really quickly, if you use a longer lens like a, let's say, 50mm or an 85, etc., you're going to find that there's a much more of a dramatic effect in that background, and it seems to be moving a lot faster than if you were to use a wide angle lens. Maybe just try it. If you have a zoom lens, try it wide open, see what it looks like, and then try it again zoomed in. Obviously, you're just going to have to step further back, see what the difference is, and you can tell for yourself. Now, this is such a great shot because you're allowed to focus in on the subject while also showing their surroundings, so it's kind of a 2-kill. Now, one of the other things is that because you're rotating around, there's a high room for error in the actual distance you are from the subject. So unless you have a follow focus system where you can constantly adjust that, I would suggest shooting at a higher aperture so you have a wider range in order to get that focus or keep the subject in focus, and that should help you in not having lots of out of focus, in focus parts to your single rotation shot. Yeah? So what about the push in and the pull out? So what do you think? Which one was the Ronin SC? You think the first or the second? So the second of those shots was actually the Ronin SC, and the first of them was the stabilizer, the Steadicam. Now this type of shot is perfect for using a Steadicam because it's a very simple motion of just walking in and walking out, or it could be zooming in, zooming out. But essentially, because you're just holding it at one point of contact here, and you're keeping your fingers just at this point here to keep it steady, it means that you're not going to have to be rotating or anything like that. You're just going to be walking straight, which is awesome for what the Steadicam was built for. However, the Steadicam has its downfall in this shot, because what happens if you want to start high and then go down low as you're moving forward? Now you'll notice with the Steadicam, if I start shooting up here and then I want to go lower, this is the ground, right? This is the ground. You can't go any lower. You're gonna have to flip this around to start shooting again. Now that's obviously an issue, whereas with the gimbal, you can switch from vertical mode to underslung mode. I don't actually know what the vertical mode I just referred to is called. Let's put you down. Call it upright mode and then switching to underslung mode. You don't have that problem where you've got this big sled on the bottom of your Steadicam. So for me, the Ronin SC or a stabilized gimbal like this takes the cake. So a quick little tip on lens usage for this as well. If you're going to be pulling into a subject or pulling out, a wider lens is going to give you a better understanding of the subject itself. So if it's like a person, you're going to see more of the subject against the background. It's going to focus in on the subject and what they're doing. But if you use a longer lens, it's more likely you're doing this to focus in on smaller features like facial expressions, body language, things like that, because you see less in the image and it's going to make that background stand out less in comparison to the subject. Or if I flip that around, it's going to make the subject stand out more in comparison to the background. So what's also really cool about this shot is depending on how you set your aperture depends on how dramatic you want this shot to be. So let's say you have your aperture set at a fast aperture, let's say a 1.4 or a 2.8. You're gonna have a very, or I mean even 3.5, 4, you're gonna have a very small area of what's in focus. So what you can do if you're doing a push-in shot, you can take this from being out of focus and moving into being in focus. Now, of course, you can speed that up in your post-production and it's gonna look a lot faster, and it's almost this dramatic of what's in frame, this is what the viewer's thinking, what's in frame, and as we get closer, things become more understanding, we get a better understanding of what the subject is doing or what's in focus. Sneaky little one. So what about our favorite shot with any type of gimbal is that following or the tracking shot, where we simply follow a subject, we see what they're doing, could be an object, could be anything. In this case, we've got a person. Now the first shot was shot on the Ronin SC. However, I really like the more natural feel that the Steadicam gives you in this shot. You have a little bit more movement as if you're actually following that subject, being a person behind them. But again, it depends on the type of mood of your shot. Let's say you're shooting a scene where you want the person to feel alone, like they're not being followed or anything like that. I would go for something that's shot on a gimbal because you don't have any shake, any other movement whatsoever, and it doesn't make the viewer feel like they're a person following that subject. But if you want that feeling of the fact they're surrounded, they have other things going on, I prefer the Steadicam in this shot. Now the cool thing about this shot is a lot of people may limit themselves to just following a person with this type of shot, but it doesn't have to be. Now you could follow someone's hand along a wall, you could follow their phone in their hand as they walk, or the ball in this case, or maybe a leaf blowing in the wind across the pavement or something like that, across the road or whatever that is. There's so many different options, just do not pigeonhole yourself and think you have to be following a person. Also, the cool thing is, you could be doing this at any different angle. You could go right from behind them, you could go over the top, you could go from the side, you could rise up and go from over the top. It doesn't matter, try it, just try it with different things, maybe just tracking a car on the side of the road, a leaf blowing or a dog running. Just try different things and see what you think works for you. Talking of things that work for you, the roll and the Dutch angle might be the shot that, if you get this wrong, it's gonna be bad. Like you do not want to see this type of shot in a high-end commercial video shot for an office company, for example, because it just doesn't work. But in the right situation, so powerful. First shot on the DJI Ronin SC, and I'm going to tell you, this shot is a hell of a lot easier to shoot on the gimbal versus a stabilizer like the Steadicam. Now, one of my favorite parts to this is the fact that it introduces curiosity, and it's not an angle that we see in our daily life. Like, we don't walk around with our heads at this angle, do we? Or that angle, or we don't rotate our heads at a certain angle like dogs do when they don't understand us. And that kind of brings into how this is such a good shot for showing curiosity. What do dogs do when they don't understand something? When we make a funny noise? Tilt their heads to the side, don't they? Now, I will give you a warning to this. If you're not sure about using this shot, don't use it. But if you're sure about the shot you want to be using and you understand how it's going to fit into your piece, play around with it, get stuck in, do what you want to do. Now I mentioned how much easier this was to shoot on the gimbal versus the Steadicam. Now for the gimbal, you just sit it out right in front of you and you simply just press left or right on the wheel and pull back or push forward. Simple, easy. But for the Steadicam, it's so much different. Now because your point of roll isn't centered on the Steadicam, you have to be bringing your Steadicam round to the side. So notice, right, if I start rotating from my main point here, this is my focus point, it doesn't work, does it? Like, I'm looking up here and then I rotate and it's coming around to the side here, which means if I'm going to do this, I need to be bringing my whole glide cam off to the side to try and ensure that the center of my camera shot is centered up to my subject, what I'm looking at, so I'm moving the rest of the gimbal to one side. It's not an easy move. Now it is a really good technique for drawing attention to a subject. Now one of the great ways to use this is kind of like I described earlier, by coming into focus with this. So shooting at a faster aperture, keeping it low, and then moving in toward the subject, showing that you're drawing attention to them and they're coming into focus. It adds to that curiosity of the shot. Maybe you can do it pulling them out of focus. Again, more variations, try your different shots out and see what you like. Now what about the following one, the boom and the jib shot? Now you wouldn't see this used in many YouTube videos, a standard YouTube video or travel videos or anything like that, but it's used in cinematics all the time. And when I say cinematics, I'm talking like cinema movies, movie theaters, and it's a really great way to help tell a story. So of course, let's play the shot through, see what you think. So the first shot was the gimbal, and I actually found this a lot harder to do with the gimbal than I did with the Steadicam. Now I picked the boom jib shot, and I picked this type of boom I picked this type of boom jib shot because a typical boom job, right? A typical boom or jib shot is just straight, okay? But you can't really do that with a Steadicam. Right? You can go forward and you can extend out like this, if we had this set up properly. But if I want to like go through a car window or go through a door or something like that, I've got to tilt this on its front, especially if it's a narrow space, and I can't, it doesn't work, right? Because I'm going to be pointing at the ground. So I wanted to choose a shot where I'm going over the top of the subject and then pointing down as we come over the top. Now this isn't typically a shot that I would use a lot, but it is very widely used and it's a great shot for revealing something within your shot or your scene. So let's say you're following a subject and you rise up, you boom up, it's going to reveal what's behind them or what's in front of them. So now what about a few tips on using a Steadicam versus a gimbal? And I should probably start this off with why I even have both of these. Now I wouldn't suggest going out saying on your kit list now you need a Steadicam and a gimbal. So I started off with a Canon G7X, a vlogging camera, and I saw this $30 stabilizer. Anyway, fast forward a year or so, I needed some kind of stabilizer and I didn't have the money for a automated gimbal like a Ronin S or a Zion Crane or something, or Zhuiyun or however you pronounce it. So I went for a Steadicam. It's not an official Steadicam, I think this one's like a Flycam. But I found that it was awesome. It did a lot of shots that I wanted. However, it's still very cumbersome. At the time I was shooting on an A6300, which is not a heavy camera. And you will find, you speak to anyone, any professional that's used a Steadicam, these things are much better the more weight you have on them. Really helps with stabilization and less of that boaty feel where you swing from side to side. Anyway, fast forward another year from there, and I got my first automated gimbal. It was a Zion Crane, and as great as it was for some shots, I just didn't pay attention to understanding how to stabilize it properly. I didn't know that was such a big factor. I figured that it's got motors, it'll be able to figure itself out. But I'm telling you right now, that is the gold to using a stabilized gimbal like the Ronin SC, etc. So if you haven't or don't know how to properly stabilize your gimbal, that's cool. Just check out this video up here and it'll talk you through the whole process and why it's so important. So now we've talked about a little bit of history, what's the most important thing to these gimbals? And that is the walk. The ninja walk, the crip walk, whatever. It's not crip walk, it's just a ninja walk. That's all people call it. Now, since a Steadicam or a gimbal stabilize on all levels apart from vertical or horizontal, you're going to make sure that your feet and you're moving in the right way. So essentially, you're going as much as you can from heel toe to create a rolling effect that's as smooth as possible. And I mean, just like, I'm just going to interrupt with never, ever walk sideways. Never strafe sideways when you're using a gimbal. I mean, try it, right? Like, I want you guys to experiment, but try it and then try the same shot just walking forwards or walking backwards. And trust me, you will notice a huge difference. It's amazing. Anyway, so once you have the walk down, once you've got that all figured out, you want to start focusing on locking your arms at 90 degrees, locking your elbows in at 90 degrees to your ribs over here to create that locking mechanism so that you don't have any up and down movement or forward and back movement. You're trying to keep that as stable as possible. So when you see me walking around with the gimbal, if I'm doing a simple push in or pull out shot, I've got this tucked in here and I'm moving with my body and moving with my legs as opposed to moving with my arms. So the next one is not necessarily about how you hold the gimbal, but just shoot in slow motion, right? So you could shoot in 120 frames per second, you could shoot in 30 frames per second, 60 frames per second. Just use something that you can then slow down in post-production to help get rid of any kind of kinks and wobbles, because I guarantee you there are going to be some in your shot. The less amount of stabilizer you can add, the better. So what about speed? How does it make that much of a difference? You want a fast moving shot, you want a slow moving shot, but Ollie, I might be shooting 120 frames FPS, it doesn't really matter. False, in the words of Dwight Schrute. Dwight Schrute. Alright, so if you shoot in slow motion, so 120 frames per second, you're going to have a lot more flexibility when it comes to the edit. Whereas if you shoot in 24 frames per second and you want to shoot a really slow moving shot, I'm telling you right now, you're going to have a lot of unwanted shake that you didn't think you were putting into the camera at the time, but you get into post and you look at it and you think, what the f is this? I promise you, you will. So if you want a slow moving shot, get yourself into 120 frames per second and just move at your normal speed and then slow it down in post. Trust me, it's going to look a hell of a lot better. Alright, so last point for this video, foreground and background. Now, because the reason we use gimbal shots is to get motion in our shot, like physical motion in our shot, you can accentuate this by adding foreground to your shot to create a new dimension, and then by creating background in your shot that's also added contrast from your subject. Now what this is going to do is make your three layers stand out. So let's say you have a subject in your shot, you have a beautiful background, and maybe you have some grass at the front of your shot or a tree or something you can move past. Use these type of things because they're going to really help add that motion, add that dynamic viewpoint to your shot. I think I struggled in one of my other videos in using the dynamic talk. But add that to your shot and you'll be amazed at how much better your shots look, how much more movement there is, how much more drama it adds. So what did you think about the Steadicam versus gimbal shot? Did you automatically see the difference? Did you automatically know what was shot on what? Or were you kind of like, I don't know, they look pretty decent, or you just couldn't even tell? Because some of those I couldn't tell, and I shot them. So I'm currently planning out a video on some tips on how to edit gimbal footage, how to get the best out of it, and what you need to be focusing on when you're actually shooting it. If you're interested in that, and the video's up and it's ready on the channel, it'll be here. But if it's not on the channel, check out this video here. This will help you understand some cinematic settings for your gimbal. I spent like 2 weeks solid working on these, trying to own them, get them just right. So if you're interested, click on that one. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching. Please like, comment, share, subscribe, do what you gotta do. I'll see you guys in the next one. Alright boys, time to put you away.